You got to operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the Gators' 33-14 loss to the Kentucky Wildcats in Lexington this past Saturday. It was a noon kickoff, and for a while there, I thought maybe, granted, it wasn't too long, maybe my talking about the 2003 game where we came back from a big deficit would possibly happen, or at least I had that hope, as the Wildcats did start off with a 23-0 lead. And then the Gators scored 16-point at the half. Kentucky comes out, drives it right down, scores, takes it 30-7, and the game really never came back. For all the things that we can do, can't do, the Gators should not be blown out in year two under Billy Napier. When I said that before the season, everyone thought that was reasonable. When I say it now, people are starting to make excuses for why being blown out twice this year already is an acceptable thing, and that's weird to me. With that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the storylines we had coming into the game, the offensive keys, the defensive keys, what happened, what we filled and what we didn't. And at the end, we're going to have a hard truth that reflects the truth be told segment from the preview, which is that Kentucky was a must-win game. And if you listen to the preview episode, you know what I meant by that. And of course, we'll go over some of the things we're seeing, and you're going to see, hey, I was right about you lose this game, especially in the fashion that we lost it. And the things I said would probably happen seem to be happening. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, the storylines I had for coming to the game were, could the Gators win on the road? Of course, before the game, the program was 1-6 under Billy Napier away from the swamp. The only win being Texas A&M after the team was ravaged by injuries, going through a losing season, and of course, a flu outbreak the weekend of the Florida game, where Connor Wegman, their starting quarterback, and other players did miss the game due to the flu. And so there are a lot of questions on, can we win away from the swamp? And of course, now we're 1-7 away from the swamp, and some of these games have not been pretty. Kentucky also is now, they've won 4 of 6. We talked about how they had won 3 of the past 5. Now they're 4 of 6. They're on a 3-game streak, and that is something that you do not want to see, is a program get confidence that they just have another program's number. Of course, we know that because we did that for 31 straight years over Kentucky before this game. And anyways, with that said, the offensive keys for the game, well, establish a run. That's what we say all the time. That's what this offense wants to do. At the end of the game, we averaged only 2.4 yards per carry. Montreal Johnson, for the first time in a long time in an FBS matchup, did have the better rushing yard average than Trevor Etienne. Coming into the game, a stat that I'm not sure everyone is familiar with. I did put it on my Gator Chatter Charlotte Review article, but against FBS competition in the 5 games prior, not including the bowl game, Trevor Etienne was averaging 6.5 yards a carry. And against the same competition, Montreal Johnson was averaging 3.5 yards per carry. But in this game, Johnson got 4.2 yards per carry on 10 carries. Trevor Etienne got 29 yards on 11 carries for 2.6 yards per carry. Johnson with a long of 14, Trevor Etienne with a long of 16. Etienne, of course, having the last 4th and 2. Gators try rush to the line. No one really blocks well and gets stopped behind the line. That, of course, does not help an average at all. But while we were failing to really establish a run, and we did have a big run early, called back to a wishy-washy holding um, holding call. Unfortunately, that is what it is, but we never quite got that back, got consistency, and that's something we've got to do. Our O line does have to play better. This is actually a very experienced O line. For all the talk of how young Florida is, the starting O line is really not that young. Yes, guys like Damian George are listed as a sophomore, but this is his fourth year in college. He was at Bama for 3 years. If it weren't for the COVID year, he would be seen either as a redshirt junior or a true senior. And outside of that, and then Barber, he is a redshirt sophomore, but usually those guys should be able to play. In fact, last year he could play, was in the top 25 rated tackles in the nation, according to Pro Football Focus. Having a little bit of a down year this year, but hopefully now that the starting offensive line or our best five are fully healthy, that'll get a little bit better. But I did say if you can't establish a run, pass to open up the run. And that is one thing that the Gators didn't really do well to begin with. Now, there were times we had guys like Khalil Jackson who was open and we just missed them. We had Douglas beyond the defense who we just missed early. And then, of course, we had Arliss Boardingham get a ball thrown his way, and so when it hits them, it ends up in the hands of Kentucky. They take it back to or end up with the ball around the 15 and end up punching it in to go up 10-0. So a little bit of that pass problem not being great. I did note here that we had 50 yards before being down 23. The reason is just like how I talked about Utah, we only had 114 or something yards before we were down by 3 scores. And then, of course, when we're down by a lot, we're going to pass a lot more. Opposing teams, if you're down by 3 scores, they may let you nickel and dime and run time. And that's what we saw against Utah. We did see some of that against the Wildcats, but we also saw against the Wildcats some great throws a little bit more down the field. Caleb Douglas coming out with another outstanding jump ball catch. Unfortunately, was injured on the play, and now he's expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. But with his massive catch, it set up the Gators' first touchdown to bring it within 16 points. Unfortunately, that's as close as we'd be for the rest of the game. As many of you know, not the biggest fan of this offense. Things we didn't see this week that we could see, and I harped on how great it was to see in the Charlotte game, is like the slants on first and second down, these quick throws that will, if you complete them, back off the pressure a little bit, help your offensive line out. There's many people talking about, well, we don't have the offensive line to be throwing it everywhere. You don't need a great offensive line to do a snap, zero, step drop, throw, just that fast. You can find out routes. You can rub routes where one guy essentially is, for lack of a better word, running a pick play on one of the DBs, guarding your receiver to open them up. There are things that we don't see that you can run and have really quick routes. I know for a lot of you who have listened for a long time, you've heard me talked about doing these quick routes, these 0 1 step routes, these quick things that back a defense off, open up the run. And unfortunately, we did not do enough of that on Saturday and we got blown out. I do have here, I thought a favorable matchup was Wilson against whoever Kentucky's nickel player was. Wilson was out, unfortunately, ended up not playing after all. But with that said, Khalil Jackson, who did play in that spot he got open. Wasn't seen quite as much, but when he was seen, he did pretty well. So I'll think that was really a good, favorable matchup for the Gators. Moving to the defense. The For the defense, the Gators, I said we have to stop the run first thing, because if we can stop the run and force Kentucky to pass, I thought we'd be fine against Devin Leary. Unfortunately, we weren't good against the run. Gave up 280 yards rushing to Davis and probably could have been more at the end, but Mark Stoops chose to let the clock run out rather than get another touchdown against the Gators. I was really shocked at how badly we tackled. I believe we had 19 missed tackles in the game. And with the 19 missed tackles in the game, I think that was double what we had to season coming up to this. And you're not going to win doing that. There were times where our guys were perfectly in a gap, and Mr. Davis, Ray Davis, went and broke the tackle and made a guy miss and ended up getting tons of yards. And if we had just made the tackle, he's not going for a first down. He's not going for a 75-yard touchdown or whatever it was. It was a 75. I'm double checking. I'm like, I thought it was 75. Let me double check. There were times we had guys there and just our guys didn't do what we've seen them do. And that's unfortunate because that meant Devin Leary did not have to pass. Early on, we should have had a pick six on him. We got a little bit of pressure. But when the other team's putting up 300 rushing yards on you, that means their quarterback doesn't have to worry about, being under pressure, doesn't have a chance to throw costly turnovers like he had thrown 2 interceptions to Vandy the week before. And it is what it is, just to be honest. You stop that run, the Gators have a much better chance. And admittedly, and I left this on here, I said the favorable matchup for UF was the front seven against the Kentucky O line, who had been inconsistent. I talked to some Kentucky fans leaving the stadium, and they said, "We thought you were going to kill us," because their offensive line had been inconsistent and that Ray Davis had not been doing well, or, not nearly as well as he did against the Gators. And unfortunately, we just did not have a great tackling day, and that is going to sink us. The difference between my thoughts on the offense and defense is we've seen a lot of problems for over a year now with the offense, with not finding ways to create, running yards or passing to set up the run when other teams stack the box, which the Wildcats did. If you listen for a while, you've heard me talk about how this is what I call the Vandy method, because Vandy did it last year. And then after Vandy did it, Oregon State did it. And then after Oregon State did it, Utah did it. And then Tennessee didn't do it in the first half. And we ran all over Tennessee. Tennessee did it in the second half, didn't have a great second half. Now Kentucky has done it. And here we are. With all of that said, the defense, we've seen a lot of improvement already. We've seen us do well tackling this year under Austin Armstrong. So this is, if it becomes an issue where it's consistent missed tackles, then I'm going to worry a lot more. I'm not worrying about it as much at this point because this seems to be an aberration of Austin Arm, or you know a rarity of Austin Armstrong's defenses based on what we've seen. Again, if it becomes something we see consistently, then I'll feel different. But the offense, it's been consistent where if teams stack the box, we don't move the ball and they put up points. The Gators are 5-9 against F or Power 5 opponents under Billy Napier. In all 5 or in all 9 losses, we have been down by multiple scores. And that is defined as 9+ points, where we need to score 2 scores while the other team scored 0 to tie it up or to take the lead. And we've been down multiple scores to every single team during our 5-9 in our 14 games against Power 5 opponents. And a big portion of that is, well, granted, last year was defense, but also the offense not being able to catch up. So when people talk about we want an offensive coordinator, when people talk about, hey, this slow, methodical run first offense isn't working, it's because you have such a slim margin that if your defense has a bad day like this, you can't keep up. Meanwhile, you look at like the LSU Ole Miss game, which that was phenomenal to watch. I enjoyed watching both teams put up a ton of points. I think it was over 1,300 yards. But you look at that game, and both those teams essentially had what Florida had on defense against the Wildcats. The difference was they had ways to respond and get yards and keep up. And that's and if we go back to even like the 2020 team when we had bad defense but a great offense, we could always hope to come back if we just got one stop. I mean, I've talked about how the 2020 SEC championship game was not as close as the one score, at the end made it seem. But at the same time, we had an offense where we knew if we could just get that stop, we could go down and score. I don't feel that way about this offense. And that's what scares me when I see, hey, our defense has a bad day against a running back, or we've allowed people to pass because we can't counter 7 to 8 guys in the box. So hopefully that's something that will change. But that's why I want to be clear. I'm not excusing the Gators' poor defensive performance against the Wildcats, but I am saying if you have an explosive offense and increase that margin for error. So if you have an off day like this, or an opponent has a big game, you're still in it. You still have a chance. I mean, heck, 2021, LSU. AR comes in, we have an explosive offense. We couldn't stop anyone. We couldn't stop their running back like we couldn't stop Davis here. But it wasn't a blowout because our offense could be explosive. AR drove the ball down the field. Now, as a redshirt freshman, did he get the job done? No, didn't end up with a win, but he brought it a lot closer than it had been up to that point and was going toe to toe with them. Unfortunately, their defense got a stop while ours didn't. This one, defense held Leary to 69 yards passing. Granted, gave up over 300 yards rushing. But if the offense were up there, if the offense, could play with tempo, did stuff, we might be able to overcome the bad defensive performance. So I'll be curious to see how that is going forward. With that said, let's move into the hard truth. And the hard truth, really, I said going to the game in the Truth Be Told preview segment, I said Kentucky is a must win. Now I'm going to say Kentucky was a must win. And over on Gator Chatter in my preview write up, I took the definition of must win, which means a situation where losing would erode all progress. And I talked in the Truth Be Told segment going in that, hey, losing to Kentucky could ruin all your goodwill that you've built up with the win over Tennessee. It could take away the momentum that you had coming out of that, especially with how the poor performance against Charlotte offensively was. And we're seeing that now. We get blown out by Kentucky again, our second blowout loss of the year. And now you've got people who are calling for Napier's job, which I think it's way too early for that. Way, way too early. And, anyways, with that, it's way too early to call for his job, but I understand where they're coming from of it's year 2 and we're getting blown out by any team that has a defense with a pulse. Tennessee doesn't have that great of a defense. We've talked about it previously. Hopefully that's not a continuing thing, but I see at least where these people are coming from. I don't agree with it. You also have a lot more people hopping on the offensive coordinator train. In fact, there are people on Twitter I've said, weren't you being aggressive towards people who talked about needing an OC just a few weeks ago? And one guy's like, I've seen the light. And I realized that, yeah, we need it. And a lot of that stems from we're not just losing, we're losing badly. And we're losing to teams that we probably should be beating if you look at our talent profile. If you look at the actual amount of experience on our offense, should be doing better than, 14 points against Kentucky, a team that should be doing better than 22 points against Charlotte, a team that should be doing better than 11 points on the road at Utah against a team that is missing several starters. It just is what it is. And so that's why Kentucky was a must win. It's hard to really say, hey, and I talked about if you beat Kentucky, it looks like that opportunity that we talked about after Tennessee. We could seize that. We could go and do some shocking things. Before the season, players were talking about the Gators want to shock the world. Now we look at the remainder of the season because of this Kentucky result, not just that we lost, but how we lost. And there are people wondering, how are we going to look against Vanderbilt? I think that's a little overblown. But again, I saw it coming. I said it before before the Kentucky game that we'd lose this game. And then we went and did it spectacularly. There's going to be people doubting how we're going to do the rest of the season. But then now that we're 1-7 on the road, Carolina looks more daunting. And again, if you've listened to this podcast, I point out Carolina's got a bye week before us. Then we face Georgia and Jacksonville. We have a bye week, but so do they. Then we face Arkansas, who has a bye week before us. They just got Rocket Sanders back. So they're going to have Sanders back and his feet back under him and a bye week to plan to come to Gainesville. Then you go to Death Valley, where the Gators have won once since 2009, I believe. And we're, because of how it looked, people think that's probably not happening realistically. Doesn't mean it can't, and I'm not saying it can't happen. But again, the perception, because Kentucky was a must win, definition, it would, erode the goodwill or the preceding progress. And there we go. And then we talk about Mizzou, who's doing well. Going to Como, late November. It's cold. Didn't look good last time we were there. And then we come home against an FSU team that honestly has looked pretty good. We can't have before the season, I said, we can't be blown out. We can't have a losing record. That was not controversial then. Hopefully, it's not controversial now. Unfortunately, we've seen the two blowouts. And we've lost to a Kentucky team that's not probably top 3 on what we see in our remaining schedule. And that's why Kentucky was a must win. And that is just the hard truth of it. With that said, I also want to give a shout out to some of our players. I know many people have seen it. It might be the most seen piece of anything I've ever done. And that was at the end of the game, I posted a picture, and it was, unfortunately, I don't have it for those watching on YouTube of it up, but you can find it on our Twitter page at Gator Podcast. I've also seen it posted on Facebook, and it was me. Took a picture of all the players that came over to sing the alma mater. And I want to be clear that I am saying, great job, guys. I'm not denouncing any players that didn't come sing the alma mater after the game. I'm not, saying anything about them, because I know I can praise a set of players without it having to be negative for another set of players. And Treyon Webb and Trevor Etienne, first two guys over there, they're like, we're going to sing the alma mater. Other guys came. Check out my photo to see the numbers. I know Jacob Rudner of Gators Online had a photo from the press box as well. Can't really see the numbers quite as well. Us, we're right in front of it. I did say something about the fans, and I'll repeat that here. And that's, if you're in the stadium at that point, if you left early, I don't care. I'm not going to tell you how to fan. The one thing that drives me nuts, though, is those players come over, they're singing the alma mater. If you're still there, with those players, with the band when that's being played. Sing it, show those players that you support them, win or lose. Again, if you were there, you left before that, I don't care. Do what you're going to do. But if you're there, sing and show your report, show your support when you're standing there and those players are facing you. Let them know that in all kinds of weather, we do stick together. And that's really my thing, because there were a lot of Gators in the aisle, a lot of Gators in the seats, not singing along, not whatever. And I understand being frustrated. But as I said to a friend of the show, Wes White, on Twitter, I said, Wes, in that situation, I feel you've got to be the Who's from How the Grinch Stole Christmas singing Fahu Dores. The Grinch has, if you've seen How the Grinch Stole Christmas or read the book, he's stolen all the stuff the Who's have, for Christmas. And yet here they are still singing, cheering. And, the Grinch is like, I could not take that away. Opposing fans and bad losses should not take that away from the Gators. Stand in the paint and show your support if you're there. Sing your song. That's all I ask if you're there. And with that said, let's go on and just give a quick shout out to our friends at Alvarez Lawn Company. If you're in the Central Florida area and need some work done on your yard, whether it's something continuing, whether you want weekly service, monthly service, or a one-time project, give our friends at Alvarez Lawn Company a call at 407-490-2617. Once again, that number is 407-490-2617. You can also reach them at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Alvarez Lawn Company, building plans that work for you. And also, lots of fun discussion going on right now over at gatorchatter.com. We do have a great discussion through all sorts of pieces of the Gator program right now. I also do write-ups for before and after games. There's information I give on the podcast I don't give there. There's information that sometimes I put things differently in the reviews and write-ups. And why do I do that? Some things are just better in print than I can say them. And sometimes my mind just works better writing, or it does when I'm talking off the cuff. We'll see how that is. And maybe you're like, man, I hate this podcast, but you know what? This writing's not bad. Anyways, go check that out. And also join the discussion. Lots of great guys over at gatorchatter.com, your Florida Gator sports bar. And with that said, everyone, again, thank you for listening. Kentucky wasn't what we wanted it to be, but I have said throughout the preseason, I'm saying it now. This is why I hang on to the objective, and the objective, and I do mean the measurable rather than the subjective of I need to see improvement. I need to see, some other flowery term. For me, it's we got to win at least 7. That is still on the table. That's why I can't be fully mad that we've been blown out twice this year. I don't like it, but we can still reach what I think we should do to show that we are on a good trajectory. Now, whether we get there or not, we will see. But when you hold on to something in the objective, it can keep you, as we said after Tennessee, from getting too high after a win, or as we said after Utah, too low from a loss. It's just like, here's what we're looking for, at least by season's end. And either you reach a goal or you don't. So figure out what your thing is. That way we're not saying all the crazy fire this after a win, or hey, everything's fixed. Anyone who says an OC, you don't know what you're talking about after one half of Tennessee. Just for everyone, chill, let it ride. Let's get through the bye week, see where we are. We've got Vandy coming up. I will have the preview up this week beforehand. It is homecoming. Everyone get ready to come out, wear blue. We will discuss that again later this week. But with that said, I do need to thank everyone for listening. Oh,